Have you ever wondered if someone can change their personality? In life, I think we all know certain people who display certain characteristics. Maybe they are more inclined to be needy or easily angered. Raise your hand. Or maybe they're just a bitter person in general. They repeat these behaviors enough times that they form a part of their characteristics, part of their personality traits. I have always been told by my friends that we have like this running joke where it's like, don't mess with Danny. Okay, I used to love saying and bragging about the fact that I would make an exceptional bouncer because I'm like so unassuming. I'm like petite, pretty girl, but with the biggest attitude known to mankind. And I used to honestly get quite off on the idea that if anyone had to cross my path in the wrong way, that I would fuck them up. I realize now that that's not necessarily always the coolest thing. I don't want to live my life like that, guys. How that relates to what I've just used as an introduction is that I used to think that was a part of my personality. I used to think that being angry or being like spicy and like fiery and irritable or snappy was just who I am. It's just how I operate in the world. And I'm over it. I'm over it. Hello, everybody. This is Time for Us, and I'm Danny Wallace. If it's your first time joining me, welcome. Time for Us is for the seekers of personal growth, and my hope is that together we will learn and laugh our way towards self-acceptance and just being better people. For all my loyal listeners, thank you for joining me again. I love you guys. I really appreciate the support. Please will you share this episode with anyone that you think it could be applicable to. I'm trying something new, by the way. I'm going to squish all of this information into around a 20-minute episode, and this will be part 1 of a 2-part series. We're going to see if condensing things helps increase the listenership and if it's something that works for you guys. You know, I aim to please. So let's get stuck in, shall we? This episode is going to cover how we are led to having these personality traits through our repetitious behaviors. It's going to cover something called a thought and feeling loop, which if it has the word loop in it, I'm well a fait. I love to loop out. It's also going to cover how our thoughts literally impact us on a cellular level. They change us on a cellular level. And we're going to touch on steps that we can take in order to change, which are all things we can do in the confines of our big, beautiful minds. Thank you for joining me. Let's get into it. The book we're covering is Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. Dr. Joe Dispenza, mi scusi. And a lot of it is around the power of your thoughts and the impact that that has on our reality. Let's start with discussing the concept of a state of being. How we think and how we feel can create a state of being. We can create a consistent state of being, which then becomes our personality. Ouchies. When I started reading this book, and I read this whole concept of developing our personality, I, as per usual, took it as a personal attack on me, because I always used to play the game where I would say, you know, like when you're sitting with your mates, I don't know if you guys ever do this, and you might say to someone, okay, well, what's the one thing you would never change about yourself? My answer would always be my personality, because I always thought that I had such a vivacious, energetic presence about me. And I don't know, I think maybe we've always associated the word personality with positive attributes, but it's quite interesting to look at it from the angle of the fact that that can include negative attributes as well. It's not only, oh, well, she's got a great personality. Like, you can also have a cuck personality, and your personality can be multifaceted as well. So leaning into this personality concept, I did the classic Google search, define a personality, and this is what it says: a combination of characteristics or qualities that form an individual's distinctive character. Okay, class, so we are getting into our first reading. I love it for us. Here we go. Quite simply, our routine, known thoughts and feelings perpetuate the same state of being, which creates the same behaviors and creates the same reality. If we want to change some aspect of our reality, we have to think and feel and act in new ways. We have to be different in terms of our responses to experiences. We have to become someone else. We have to create a new state of mind. We need to observe a new outcome with that new mind. I mentioned it in the beginning of this podcast where I just said, like, having parts of yourself that are no longer serving you. And mine is this like vuss, kind of easily induced into anger person that I used to think was quite cool about me. And I've realized has kept me in a very specific and confined way of seeing the world around me and engaging with the world around me. I've reached a point in my life now where I really want to change my reality. I feel stuck in a way, and I know that I am growing and developing, so I'm not here to bash myself down, but I'm ready to break through the ceiling, like the glass ceiling that I think has been put on top of me by myself. And one of the ways I think in which I need to do that is to take a long, hard look at myself and really inquire as to how I am responding to the stimuli of my life and what that means in terms of the reality I'm creating for myself. But how did we get here, guys? How did we get into this habit of thinking and feeling and thinking and feeling and doing it enough times that it actually becomes who we are? The brain is the starting point of all thoughts and feelings, as we know. So let's start with that. Neuroscientific theory states that the information gathered from our experiences in our external world informs our actions and behaviors. But more than that, we memorize these actions and behaviors, and all that information is stored in the layers of our gray matter. I think a word that we must highlight to segue into our next point is the word memorized. We've memorized certain actions. So how did we get to the point of memorizing them? This is when we enter with the concept of the thought and feeling loop. As you think certain thoughts, your brain produces chemicals that causes you to feel the way that you were thinking. That makes sense, right? We all know that the power of your thoughts, I mean, we've been hearing this has been drilled into us for, I swear, millennia. And you know that just by thinking something, you can cause a reaction in your body to feel a certain way. For example, if you were revisiting an encounter with someone that really ticked you off, and you were sitting and doing that in the confines of your lounge, you can generate a chemical response in your body that is going to make you feel inside of your body pissed off again. Once you feel the way you think, you start to think the way you feel. And this continuous cycle creates a feedback loop that is called a state of being. I never realized that you can start thinking the way that you feel. It seems quite obvious, but I always thought that, how you think impacts the way that you feel, and not that how you feel impacts the way that you think. The fact that those two are so inextricably bound is fascinating to me. Our brains and our bodies are so intricately connected, as we know. And in an ideal world, how it should be is that our brain should be the master and our body should be the servant. So if I decide something consciously that is best for me, I should be able to tell my body, this is what we're doing, this is how it's going to go. That's not always the case. Sometimes our bodies can become the master, believe it or not. That's pretty wild. If you think about it from a perspective of, if you have a craving, for example, you have like a sugar craving or something, you say to yourself, logically in your mind, I'm going to eat healthily. Then your body starts sending messages to your brain saying, P.S. me scusi, not really in the mood to eat healthy right now. I'm kind of craving something. I'm craving a chemical reaction to something, and I need you to put something in my mouth so that I can feel better. It's an example of how those two roles can kind of get a little bit switched up and maybe even reversed. And I found that to be really interesting, Our bodies are constantly feeding information to our brains through our 5 senses. So when you think about it that way, I always thought that it was like a top-down approach, which is what you would like to think it should be. As I said, servant, master. That's not always the case. Sometimes the master becomes the servant, and our bodies can actually have quite a strong sway over how we approach things in our lives and the way that we feel and the way that we get through our day. So if you get into the loop of thinking a certain way, feeling it in your body, feeling it in your body, thinking a certain way, you create a pattern of thinking and feeling, like a thought and feeling loop, as we said earlier. We're going to take a look at neuroscience again and refer to something that is known as Hebb's law. Hebb's law states that nerve cells that fire together wire together. What that means is that if you activate your nerve cells enough times, it is more likely for them to activate or fire again in unison in the future. This repetition means that they kind of build a long-term relationship, and our brains physically start changing to accommodate for those repeated kind of nerve cell activations. All right, so we have our neurons firing, we've got our thoughts and feelings popping off, and at the same time that all of this is happening, we are releasing chemicals as a byproduct of that. Reading from the book again. Every time you have a thought, there is a biochemical reaction in the brain. You make a chemical. And as you'll learn, the brain then releases specific chemical signals to the body, where they act as messengers of the thought. When the body gets these chemical messages from the brain, it complies instantly by initiating a matching set of reactions directly in alignment with what the brain is thinking. Then the body immediately sends a confirming message back up to the brain, and it's now feeling exactly the way the brain is thinking. The cornerstone of this podcast episode, greatest takeaway for me, has been this concept of the thoughts and feelings loop, and how if you do that enough times, you start changing on a cellular level. Your body adapts. Crazy. It makes sense though. Like, that is the premise of our entire existence, is evolution and adaptation. And yeah, guys, crazy. This is quite a long excerpt because I think that this point's really important, so buckle up. Picture yourself as one of those people who repeatedly say or think, "It was my fault." Okay, we're going to get into an example of how this applies. After 20 years of doing this to yourself, you feel guilty and think guilty thoughts automatically. Every time you think a guilty thought, you've signaled your body to produce the specific chemicals that make up the feeling of guilt. You've done this so often that your cells are swimming in a sea of guilt chemicals. The receptor sites on your cells adapt so that they can better take in and process this particular chemical expression, that of guilt. The enormous amount of guilt bathing the cells begins to feel normal to them, and eventually what the body perceives as normal starts to be interpreted as pleasurable. Scary. It's like living for years next to an airport. You get so used to the noise that you no longer hear it consciously, unless one jet flies lower than usual, and the roar of its engines is so much louder that it gets your attention. The same thing happens to your cells. As a result, they literally become desensitized to the chemical feeling of guilt. They will require a stronger, more powerful emotion from you, a higher threshold of stimuli to turn on the next time. And when each cell divides at the end of its life and makes a daughter cell, the receptor sites on the outside of the new cell will require a higher threshold of guilt to turn them on. Now the body demands a stronger emotional rush of feeling bad in order to feel alive. You become addicted to guilt by your own doing. Shooketh. The body becomes addicted to guilt or any emotion in the same way it would get addicted to drugs, guys. Oh my effing word. At first, you only need a little of the emotion/drug in order to feel it. Then your body becomes desensitized and your cells require more and more of it just to feel the same again. Trying to change your emotional pattern is like going through drug withdrawal. Look, I know it's an extreme statement, but he said it, not me. I don't know, guys. I was stunned. I still am stunned when I think about that. And I can see it play out so obviously in my life. Reading this book has helped me really lean into being more conscious of how I'm thinking and how I literally am sitting and creating a chemical reaction and kind of like getting high on my own supply. The level of rumination that I can get into, or like even like slightly obsessive thoughts. I just sit and I can like stew and rile myself up. And I've noticed it so much more now in my life, especially because I'm starting to get my shit together. It's so wild. My life is falling into place. Wow. Like, things are looking up. I've got a good job. I'm doing the podcast. My relationship's in a good space. I've got great friendships. I literally have fuck all to be doing, like to be driving myself crazy for. Yet, what do? I go and I sit, and like I'm almost either trying to create chaos, like by playing things out in my head, or like fixating on things that are kind of unhealthy. And yeah, like living in a fantasy. I build up these fantasy worlds in my head. It can be obsessive thoughts, like, yeah, I don't even know if I can really disclose some of them on this podcast, which is a first for me. I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, like I am so into drama. I'm so into drama. It's insane. And I can feel myself, like I've started, especially being in Komaki, because I'm on my own. I have no one to mirror my ridiculous thought patterns to me. And I'll be sitting there in Kom, in my little loft, getting so anxious. And I'm like, eventually I stop and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you anxious? Then I realize it's because I'm sitting and I'm stewing, because my body is so used to being in chaos or in overwhelm, and that way of being, my cells are craving a hit. My body's craving a hit of anger or of like resentment or agitation. And I go, because my life's pretty good, lucky me, what do I go and do? I make one for myself. I'm like, don't worry, cells, I'll make you a little crack pipe of your own imagination to get you off and get you through the day. One of the greatest differences between human beings and the rest of the animal kingdom is that we all share the capacity for survival mode, and we all know what that means. You know, if confronted by a threat, we are able to respond in a way that defends us. Human beings are the only animals that can turn on our survival mode by thought alone. Just by sitting and thinking, we can put ourselves into survival mode. We know that that's not good for us. We know that that's the stuff that creates cancer, guys. I'm not even being dramatic. Filling your body up with these chemicals that are there in order to protect us from what would be a predator. We are now sitting and drenching ourselves in these intense chemical reactions for a phantom predator. The threat isn't even really there, but we're gearing ourselves up for defense, or to protect ourselves, you know? So what was once an adaptive and beneficial behavior has now become maladaptive and really quite harmful for us. Back to the book we go. Here's what it says. In time, we unconsciously become addicted to our problems, our unfavorable circumstances, or our unhealthy relationships. We keep these situations in our lives to feed our addiction to survival-oriented emotions, motherfucker, so that we can remember who we think we are as somebody. We just love the rush of energy we get from our troubles. Could not be more applicable to me. Our bodies and our minds are such powerful things that I fear if we do not pay enough conscious awareness or conscious attention to them, they can literally start running the show on our behalf. And they, you know, like you basically can end up operating on autopilot and kind of lose control of your life force energy, because so much of it gets sucked up and sucked away from us by these automatic programs and these looping thoughts, and almost like burning away, I feel like, our mitochondria. Our poor cells must just be working so hard while we send ourselves into this state of fight or flight, into survival mode, just for good measure, because we underestimate how important it is to be aware of what we're thinking. I'm trying something new, guys. I'm not going to drag this episode out. This is going to be part 1 of a 2-part series. I hope that this gave you some kind of new information that you might not have known before. Next episode, I'm going to talk about metacognition, which is going to be around how we can take a step towards conquering this and how we do it. How do we take control of our minds and our bodies again? Thank you so much for listening. Please let me know what you think of this kind of more concise, bite-sized type episode style. Please will you share this episode? As I said, rate my podcast, follow me on Spotify. Spread the word far and wide. and help me make this podcast the best it can be for you. I'm doing it for you, guys. I'm doing it for me too, but I'm doing it for you. So let's do it together. I love you and have a beautiful day. Mwah.